A Cautionary Tale. A 30-gram mushroom trip report by Psychonaut, posted to earwid.org December 11th, 2006. To the reader. Psychedelics have had a major influence in my life, in exceptionally positive and negative ways. Overall though, I would say it's positive. However, I feel it is of utmost importance to communicate that psychotropics are not toys. They should not be abused and should never be underestimated. The following is an account of the worst night of my life. I don't mean to turn anyone off of psychedelics. I still take them, even after that night. But I just mean to say that you should be careful, wise, and be prepared. I'd had significant experience of mushrooms before this mental excursion. If you are a relatively new user, do not even consider a dose of this magnitude whatsoever. The circumstances. After an unpleasant trip on about a quarter, I now had a little over an ounce of mushrooms left, and I was determined to achieve my head-breaking trip no matter what. Unfortunately, I was experiencing serious second-guessing. I was even very near to the point of just throwing it all out and pretending it never happened. My continued sanity would be well worth a few hundred wasted dollars. I did not, however, heed the call of my intuition. At home, alone, depressed and frightened on a Monday night, with school the next day, I ate every last bit of that ounce. After a couple of minutes, the taste alone made me gag with almost every mouthful. My body did not want to consume this, but I forced it to anyway. The trip. My first impressions were almost immediate. They were not direct effects, but rather perceived and self-perpetuated effects instead. Namely, extreme paranoia and an intense feeling of wrongdoing. My stomach was starting to hurt. I was getting the overwhelming impression that I had killed myself. The effects at this point hadn't even set in. It now became a race. I decided that I had to get to bed and fall asleep before it set in. If I was asleep, my foolish logic told me that it could not hurt me. My stomach was protesting earnestly. I tried to vomit. I ran my finger to the back of my throat to no avail. It was down, and it was staying. By now, I was panicking, trying to think of anything that might help me. I took Papia enzymes, a digestive aid, but they did nothing. I took some Tums and some apple cider vinegar. Both had been known to make me puke within minutes, but nothing. My stomach was hurting like mad, and the effects were now starting to kick in. I don't know how long it had been since I ate them. I'd fought the effects. I tried to deny them. I tried to tell myself the shrooms were duds, or that this wouldn't be all that intense. I tried to tell myself I could handle it, whatever happened. In reality though, I was growing absolutely certain that I had severely fucked up. I made some tea, a last-ditch attempt. I ran into my mother, and I'm not even sure if the sentence I constructed made any sense whatsoever. I said I had a sore stomach and I was going to bed. She sympathised in a motherly way and let me be. It was a half-saving grace. I was in my room now, afraid to leave, afraid to stay, afraid to fall asleep, and afraid not to. I lay in bed and waiting, lights out, desperately afraid. The trip came over me in a wash of colour and motion. These were the most intense visuals I have ever experienced, and some of the most disturbing. The best words I can use to describe it are kaleidoscoping gore. Colours and geometric forms and grimacing fleshy masses, faces, maggots, they spun wildly through each other, tearing and melding skin, muscle tissue. My ears buzzed, my stomach ached, my head was being crushed, stomped on, torn to pieces, eaten and digested. I was being consumed. It was like some sick, bitter revenge. Everything was reeling. I forced my eyes open, and my room was a tableau of death. My lamp was a body hanging from the ceiling, grinning, melting, decaying. Everything around me was dead and laughing. I did not know where I was, or what was happening at all. All I knew was that I had done it to myself. I'd killed myself. I was going to die now. I fumbled around and managed to turn my lights on. This fended off the visions to a certain extent. but I could not really fight them. They came in wave after wave. I lived lifetimes. I died horrifically. I tumbled through endless landscapes of abstract nothingness and exponentially increasing worlds of fear. I struggled to cling to some rational thought processes. I tried to think of a way out. If I called the hospital, what then? If I'd told my parents, what then? If I called a friend? I couldn't do anything. I could not move, I could not think. Everything was spinning wildly. I could not control it. I could not hold it back, and I could not rationalise it. Eventually, I cannot say how long this took, but the visual subsided somewhat. I lay curled in a fetal position with the lights on, my stomach pulsing with agony, my mind buzzing and twirling, fleeting glimpses of nothing and everything. Pain. I could not escape the pain. There was no way out. I had to do something. But I couldn't do anything. I lay there for I didn't know how long, shifting occasionally, forcing my body to move, certain now that if I didn't continue to fight it, it would kill me for certain. There would be no chance. Eventually, I managed to pull myself out of bed and drag myself to the washroom. It was late now, and everyone else was asleep. Mushrooms make me urinate a lot. I'll be making a number of trips to the washroom that night. Dozens, probably. Or perhaps that's an exaggeration. The washroom was clean and static, relatively so. It was almost like a safe haven of sorts. I tried to puke again, but to no avail. It would have been futile anyway. The alkaloid had been metabolized already. The rest was just waste matter. I watched my face in the mirror for a very long time, wondering what I had done, who this was, why I was suffering, what I had done to myself, whether I was even real anymore, and whether anything had ever been real in the first place. I staggered back to my room and opened the door. I had previously turned the lights off. I held the door frame to support me. Everything was swaying around. For an instant, it was my room. Then the digital clock's red numbers receded into the distance, and everything transformed into a neon carnival. Towering mushrooms glowed amidst inexplicable shapes, silhouetted in glowing neon colours. I fell to my knees and crawled to my bed. My face felt as though it was dissolving. I was slack-jawed and falling apart, every single piece of me. And the bed held no safety. It was a psychotic raft in a sea of psychotic impossibilities. I closed my eyes and desperately clung to the last bit of reality I knew. They shouldn't kill me. My emotions and senses told me I was dying, but I knew I shouldn't be, and I held on to that thought. The next several hours I spent either pissing, curled in a ball on the bathroom floor, or floating through infinite space. I cannot begin to explain the feeling of constant bombardment. All of my senses were perpetually overloaded, non-stop, for hours on end. I could not stop it, and I didn't even try to anymore. I simply let it wash over me. I was caught in the middle of a powerful river and was clinging desperately to a rock. The rock came in the form of a word that was repeated over and over to me, or perhaps I was saying it to myself. The word was Starwipe. I don't think it meant anything, but I do think the repetition was vitally important. I was caught in this endlessly repeating cycle, and the only way to stay inside and not slip away into oblivion, and what I thought must surely be death, was through this very word, Starwipe. I kept it close. I tried to understand it. I tried to search for a way out, a way to break the cycle. Sometimes I thought I had, but I would simply slip into another one, and then it all became the same. There were instances of calm. I could see myself, my essence floating freely and calmly through outer space, past stars and galaxies. A feeling of home, similar to the intense grounding trip I had at Harriet's where I visited the Orion Nebula. It simply slipped back into the chaos again though. a fleeting moment of simplicity and peace, then gone. And there was another such moment, and here I regained control. I was able to reassert myself in the real world, to reclaim my mind as my own. It happened while I was in the washroom. I believe I was curled on the floor, when suddenly I felt what can only be described as an awakening, or a profound realization. Suddenly, everything was clear. Absolutely everything. Everything that had ever happened, and ever would happen. The why, the how, the who, just everything. I stood and felt the energy of the universe spilling through me. I was invincible. I felt powerful enough to flip a car or race against a photon. I didn't have to eat or breathe or sleep. I could do or become whatever I wanted. The feeling lasted maybe 5 minutes, if that. And then, it was gone. Lost and forgotten completely, save for this abstract verbal communication of it. Words cannot explain it though. I may never feel it again. After this point, however, I had hit the turnaround. I did not return to bed. I sat in my armchair and left the lights on. I was slumped and barely able to move, but I was awake and I was in control again. I felt pride and a sense of victory. I had won. I had lived. My stomach still hurt though, a lot, and my mind was far from clear, but the worst was finally over. Without question, I had made it through to the other side. Every so often, I would struggle to lift my head and have a sip of cold tea. It was vaguely soothing. It kept liquid and some semblance of nutrition in me. The more I fed water through my system, the more I filtered it. After several hours of this, I decided I was ready for solid food. I went to the kitchen to make some oatmeal. I sat on the floor while the water boiled. My cat did not know the ordeal I had just gone through. It did not understand the hell. It expected to be fed the moment I stepped into the kitchen. I felt like shit. Oatmeal and juice in hand, I made my way back to my room and tried to eat. I stomached perhaps 2 or 3 spoonfuls before realising that I was not yet ready for food. I lay there, slumped in my chair until around 6:30 AM, at which point I moved back to my bed. I did not care if I was late for school. I could not care less. I sat for maybe a half hour before my mum was above me, shaking me awake. The first thing I noticed when I opened my eyes and sat up was that the demons were gone. My head felt lighter, and I knew that everything was essentially back to normal. Almost 8 solid hours of absolute hell vanished into memory. I wandered into the kitchen and read the comics. I cannot say if I really read them, but I did try. My parents didn't understand why I was so tired. As far as they knew, I had slept all night. I did not explain myself. My oatmeal, reheated, was perhaps even more unpalatable, so I decided not to eat it at all. I stumbled out of the house and into the cold morning air, and it was sort of refreshing, I guess. The aftermath. This trip yielded probably the most definite after effects yet. The immediate effects were physical, namely my stomach. The gut rot had taken an extreme toll on me. I was barely able to eat for most of the day, and my stomach was still uncomfortable with most foods for almost 2 weeks. As far as my mind itself is concerned, I was humbled, but also strengthened. I was unable to explain much of anything to anyone, but I knew that I had seen more than most humans could ever imagine, and I had survived it. There was a secretive pride in that. My outlook would be forever changed. I cannot indicate a single lesson that I may have learned, but it is unquestionable in my mind that I gained the equivalence of a decade of life experience from that one night. Actually, I can say with fair certainty that I lived hundreds, if not thousands of years worth of lifetimes in that very night. Only perhaps a decade stayed with me though, consciously. In terms of long-term effects, I can say without exaggeration that I was tweaked for about 6 to 8 months after this trip. Textured surfaces would often move or pulsate when I was completely sober. I would get low-dose mushroom highs no matter what drug I took or how much of it. And sometimes my perception shifted entirely into a bemushroomed state without any catalyst whatsoever. My interpretations, vision and hearing were all occasionally flooded with non-existent stimuli. I'm still wary of psychedelics. I know the true power now. My head has been broken open, my brain rearranged. I have been eaten, digested, and reassembled by the universe, and I am forever changed. That was probably one of my very favourite megadose mushroom trip reports yet. So many lessons can be taken from this, so many different aspects of the psychedelic experience are conveyed through his trip report. Even though he didn't really get any definitive lesson from this, reading it for any psychonaut will be extremely useful. It's a great example of, say, the set and setting being a massive indicator of how the experience is going to go. If he had this experience under better conditions, it could have actually possibly have had like a full ego death. There was obviously a lot of resistance that was going on. I mean, I don't blame him whatsoever. I mean, if I was experiencing some kaleidoscoping, gory flesh world, it's going to be pretty hard for 99.9% of humans to let go if they're seeing that literally. Like, imagine that literally being something you're experiencing right now. Not even just a dream, but literally experiencing it like life itself right now. Most people are just not going to be able to accept and surrender to that. It's just going to traumatize them, and then the panic will set in, the trip's going to get even worse, and the hellscapes are going to intensify and become worse and worse and worse until you're sort of forced to break through, which is what happens towards the end. He gets like this fleeting glimpse of becoming, well, basically God, basically infinity, where he is just like consciousness itself. He's not a body. He does, like he says, he doesn't have to eat or breathe or sleep. He's just infinitely powerful, omnipotent, if you will, and omniscient as well, aware of absolutely everything, but without judgment, without bias, which is basically what sort of infinite mind is, a lack of bias, a lack of distinction. And he did experience that, and obviously that will be massively beneficial for him. I mean, this report was posted like 12 years ago. You can only imagine the amount of integration he's gone through in that time. I imagine it changed his whole life, for the better in a sense. Again, the beauty of some of these megadose reports, obviously this was pretty disturbing, but by the end of it, it really did come through the other side. Although, unfortunately, it does seem as if he's actually experienced some hallucinogen persisting perception disorder, or HPPD, which is a very real thing that I don't think science really understands exactly what causes it. But yeah, he obviously was, say, like he says, tweaked out for 6 to 8 months after the trip. He literally sort of experiences trippy scenarios every single time he has some sort of mind-altering substance, and even when he doesn't have a catalyst for it, he can just somehow slip into it as well. There's lots of theories for why HPPD comes about. I want to do a full video on it. So some people say, like, there was a good Reddit post regarding this trip report, and one of the guy's theories is that your brain is a network of neural pathways that grow stronger or weaker depending on the relative use. So if you use a hallucinogen that causes certain areas of your brain to act differently, for example, alter signals or send them where they normally don't go, and you do it enough or to a great enough magnitude, say like the 30-gram mushroom trip report here, it makes sense that the relevant connections might grow strong enough to have an ongoing noticeable effect. This is obviously a simplification of how neural pathways actually grow, but it captures the gist of it enough to explain my hypothesis. Definitely makes a lot of sense. Again, this is just a hypothesis, so the actual explanation for it could be very different. I'll do a video in the future sort of collecting many people's theories on why this actually happens. For me, that makes a lot of sense. Just doing something over and over and over again, or doing it to that magnitude, like the amount of psilocybin you're consuming in 30 grams of mushrooms is just insane. There's going to be some rewiring of your brain in that aspect. I know a lot of people who are serious about psychedelics, who do them like a lot throughout a yearly basis, and don't have breaks. They have there's, because of many forms of HPPD, there's sort of the literally the persisting visuals, but then there's also the persisting conscious shift that you have. I would rather have the conscious shift. You'd rather be in a heightened state of consciousness in your baseline sober state. That would be very beneficial for your life and personal spiritual development. But then I think just tripping out and feeling trippy all the time, like you're literally in the midst of a trip in terms of visuals and sensations, would be quite uncomfortable, to be fair. So there's obviously it's obviously a spectrum, isn't it, HPPD? And many different people can experience all different kinds of it. It's absolutely fascinating, really. This report also exhibits a great lesson to take away for set and setting. He literally says, at home, alone, depressed and frightened on a Monday night, with school the next day. Like, that is possibly one of the worst set and settings ever. You're guaranteed to go through some form of like hellscape experience with stuff like this, and on 30 grams of dried mushrooms. Like, fuck me, fair play, lad. That is unreal. Another thing, having school the next day, like, that is possibly one of the worst parts about it as well. Knowing that you have like some real world responsibilities to engage in the day after, and doing something like that is just completely ridiculous. It's a very egoic thing to do. Like, oh, it doesn't matter if I have school the next day. It doesn't matter if I'm alone and depressed and frightened out my head. I'll just do it and it'll sort me out. Like, it's just the ego dictating the experience there. And when you take 30 grams of mushrooms, you're guaranteed to have some ego dissolution experiences. And naturally, there was a resistance from the ego itself. So going into this, so it was always going to go to shit, wasn't it? So don't be doing this, boys and girls, especially if you're in school as well. Like, mate, do not be taking 30 grams of mushrooms. Even like serious psychonauts themselves in the 30s or whatever have been doing it for ages and are very conscious and know what they're doing. They won't be taking this amount. So being that young and taking 30 grams is fucking mental, mate. I don't know what sort of school he's going to, high school, middle school, who knows. I mean, he's obviously American, the way he says learned instead of learned. So, yeah, I can only assume that he's probably like 16 or something, which is crazy, man. He's going through, like, again, like he says, decades of life experience in one night, which in the end, I guess, sort of, there was obviously a lot of positive outcomes from this, in a sense, but it was just it's not worth doing this, like, as I say all the time, slow and steady wins the race. There's just no need to do all this. And another interesting takeaway from this is, the similarities between a lot of other high-dose or hellish experiences. They often progress in a similar way, falling into it, feeling like one is stuck in infinitely repeating cycles of some kind of hell and decaying, and that's what mushrooms do on the inside and out, apparently, and as above, so below sort of vibes. And then suddenly it begins to subside, and ultimately you emerge from the other side feeling like God, this mini-apocalypse and life, death, and rebirth. Really fascinating, and oftentimes, the end meta goal of psychedelics in general is sort of to realise yourself as infinite consciousness, if you believe in that. I know I do, just based upon my experiences and just reading about it all the time, but yeah, fair play if you don't, that's completely understandable. Holy shit, yeah, this was crazy, wasn't it, really? I'd like to find out if anyone has ever done 30 grams of mushrooms and just completely accepted the hellscapes. I know a lot of them, most of these megadose reports, people are just literally just like using psychedelics so foolishly and misusing them that they just go through some traumatic experience. Like, I wonder if there was a megadose report of someone who's like has a lot of experience as a psychonaut and is good at embracing like the darkness and accepting and surrendering. So when they experience the kaleidoscopic hellraiser flesh world, they just completely surrender to it and just like bam, just experience like infinite love and etc. just almost immediately. That'd be very fascinating. But I've yet to find one of them because most of these megadose reports are just people being absolute nutters. You fucking crazy cunts. So yeah, hope you enjoyed this one, guys. I know you like the megadose reports, and I do enjoy featuring them. I just want to space them out so that they don't become uninteresting. I like to let you guys savor them. So yeah, see you in some later videos in the week. Gonna start doing a lot more varied content. The next video is gonna be probably on like the untold dangers of ketamine abuse, and another one's gonna be on the connection between cave paintings and psychedelics. So stay tuned for them.